Here's Anna Bright at the kitchen, and here's her again at the baseline. Why does she have the same ready position at the baseline as when she's at the kitchen? Here's Anna Leigh Waters at the kitchen, and here's her again at the transition zone. So why is her paddle ready position very low at the kitchen? And why is her paddle ready position not very low when she's in the transition zone? Instead, she's holding her paddle the same way as where she holds it normally at the kitchen most of the time. When I first started learning pickleball at the end of 2023, one of the many things that I really struggled a lot with was being able to quickly act on a fast ball coming from the other team. And it took me a long time before I realized that it wasn't really my reaction that was slowing myself down, but a lot of it had to do with my anticipation and paddle ready position. In my opinion, anticipation is something that takes a lot more time and practice to develop, but placing your paddle in optimal positions is a much easier skill to develop at the start of your pickleball journey. And I'm going to focus today's video on the ready position, but this is going to be a very different kind of ready position video, something that you've probably not seen before, because I'll be showing you things that you've probably never thought about before. So if you spend the next few minutes finish watching this entire video, I promise you, it's going to change the way you think about ready positions the next time you're out on the court. Now, there's a good chance that you've probably already seen other videos on ready positions before, and it probably goes something like this. When you're up at the kitchen, your paddle should be in front of your body at around your waist height. As you move further back to the transition zone, your paddle should be slightly lowered to your upper thigh level. And as you move even further back, close to the baseline, you should be having your paddle close to your knee height. Now, that's all very logical and sound. In fact, that's also how I learned my ready position from the start. Until this day, I still believe this can be a good reference for a lot of people in many situations. However, I think this way of thinking about ready positions only tells half the story. In fact, if you only stick to this rule, you may potentially get stuck in a certain mindset that could be detrimental for your game later on as you advance in your skill level. And I'm going to share with you the other half to the story right after I show you my favorite pickleball bag from GoSport, which is the sponsor of this video. To fully explain this, let's go back to the court once again. If you still remember from 20 seconds ago, the reason why some ready position tutorials suggest that you should lower your paddle position as you move further away from the net is based on the assumption that your opponent is always heading the ball back to you with the same trajectory regardless of where you and your teammate are on the court. Let me draw a line to show you what I mean. You can quite easily see that if the ball gets lower as it travels closer to the baseline like this, it makes complete sense why you may want to lower your paddle ready position as you get further away from the net. So your paddle would be closer to where you'll be heading the ball. But that's also where I think this explanation is incomplete, and it doesn't account for the fact that your opponent would not be heading the same ball with similar trajectory every single time. In fact, how the ball actually comes back to you has a lot to do with a few things. Hear me out. Firstly, it depends on how you and your teammate head the ball back to them in the previous shot. There's a huge difference between you heading a high ball back to your opponent versus a low and short drop shot back to them. When your ball is high after it crosses the net, your opponent is going to make contact with the ball high, meaning they can head the ball down at you without ever needing to lift the ball up over the net. So in this case, the trajectory is going to be more like what I drew before. The ball is going to be coming straight down at you. In fact, even when you're at the kitchen, as soon as your opponent pops up the ball, you should change your ready position to be low so you can be better prepared to defend the next shot that's coming down at you. Your paddle ready position is going to be dynamic, and it has a lot to do with how high your opponent is going to be making contact with the next ball. But let's say if you had a good drop shot or a good drive that forces your opponent to make contact with the ball quite a bit below the net. In this case, do you think they're still going to be able to head the ball with the same downward trajectory back to you like before? Absolutely not. It's going to go into the net if they did that. So in this case, if your opponent decides to perform an aggressive roll volley and tries to make the ball land deep close to the baseline like before, they'll have to first lift the ball up a little bit more. Additionally, because they're heading the ball from below the net, they can't hit the ball as hard as before. Otherwise, the ball is going to fly out. Or, perhaps in this case, your opponent may not even want to choose to hit the ball deep. But why? And this brings us to the second important factor to consider. Other than the point of contact, your opponent will also assess where you are on the court to help them decide how and where they're going to be hitting the ball. For example, if your team hits a really good and slow drop shot, which buys you enough time to move halfway through the transition zone, and let's assume that your opponent is making contact just below the net. In this case, they're probably not going to try and make the ball land close to the baseline, because if they did, there's a pretty good chance that you and your teammate can just take one more step forward to aggressively counter that high ball based on the trajectory of that ball. In this scenario, the better option for your opponent is to probably hit the ball with less power and pace so that the ball can land close to your feet instead. Now, does this mean that when you're in the transition zone, you should always have your body and paddle ready position low so you can hit the next ball at your feet more quickly? I personally don't think so. In my view, the only time you should have your paddle position low in the transition zone is when you think your opponent will be making contact at around their chest height or above, because they'll be able to hit the ball in a downward trajectory with a lot of pace. You won't have too much time to defend that ball, so getting your paddle low early will help you defend that ball more easily. However, if you think your opponent will be hitting the ball at around the net height or a little bit above the net, I recommend that you keep your body position more upright and paddle ready position at your waist level, similar to your ready stance at the kitchen. Because if they choose to hit the ball at your feet in this scenario, the ball is not going to be very fast. You'll have enough time to bend down and get the ball. But if they decide to hit a faster ball at you with a lot of spin, there's actually a very good chance that the ball might pass you at your waist level and still lands inside the court. If your body and your paddle ready position is low to begin with, it'll take you a long time to bring your body and your paddle up to counter that fast ball. A lot of time, you're going to be too slow to counter that ball effectively. And that's why I think it's better to keep your ready position at around your waist level so you're more prepared to counter those harder, faster balls in the transition zone. The third factor to consider here is how hard your opponent will be hitting the ball. And when we're talking about hitting the ball hard, getting a banger paddle from our second sponsor, Enhanced Pickleball, is going to help you just do that.
Can I show you?
Aim for that corner. Yes, aim for that corner.
Like this. Hold it over.
Okay, good shot.
Let's say your team hits a poor drop shot and the ball flies over the net high. Your opponent is going to be making contact with the ball at their shoulder height or above. Now in pickleball, that's normally a put away scenario. In this case, most of the time, your opponent will try and put a lot of power on this ball to put it away, or at least forcing a tremendous amount of pressure on your team. Now, you being the smart player that you are, realize this ahead of time. So as soon as the ball leaves your paddle, you knew it's going to be a bad ball, and instead of rushing up to the net, you and your teammate decided to stay back close to the baseline and get ready to defend the next ball. Now in this case, the other team is going to try and hit this ball out of the air with a lot of power to try and put it away. But power and control don't go hand in hand. So when they hit the ball hard, they're going to have less control over where the ball is actually going to land. Now, in order to help minimize their error due to reduced control, the good players will try to compensate by heading the ball towards the direction that's most natural for the swing path of their paddle. And if it's easy to do so, they would also try to have the ball crossing the net close to the center where the net is the lowest, so they have more margin. They would try to have the ball land near the middle region of the court, where you have the highest amount of margin to the sidelines and the baseline. And by doing all of these things, if they can, it's going to help them minimize their error while still being able to hit the ball with a lot of power. So in this case, the ball is likely going to be coming over this way, landing somewhere close to the middle of the court with a lot of power. And because of that, the ball can also bounce off the court quite high. Now, if you're close to the baseline and having your paddle ready position very low, it's probably not going to help prepare you to hit the next ball. Instead, what might be a more helpful ready position would be to stand more upright and have your paddle at your waist height. And this is actually going to position your paddle closer to where you'll likely be hitting the ball. Now, because your paddle position is at your waist and your center of gravity is not all the way down, you even have the aggressive option of taking the ball on the rise as it bounces off the court and aggressively drive the ball back to your opponent, which will hopefully make your next shot easier. So the next time you're out on the court, take into account of how high your opponent will be making contact with the ball and where you and your teammate are on the court. How hard do you think your opponent is going to be hitting the ball? These are all important factors to consider when deciding where to position your paddle for the next shot, because every single shot is different. If you found this video helpful, or you think it's helped you to rethink about your paddle ready position, leave me a thumbs up, share with a friend, and comment your thoughts down below. If you don't want to miss out on future content like this, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and thank you. I'll see you next time.